Test, 1, 2.
Your trip get canceled?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I was on a plane and I got taken to Milan. I woke up and I see the little airplane thing. And
A few weeks ago? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
June
yeah,
12th.
I heard.
I'm like, Milan.
That's crazy. Yeah, it was canceled and it was postponed to a time that I can't go, so but I'm going to go to Ohio and visit my wife and kids are
Go
there.
to that West Bank.
Yeah, that's right. I'll be there. It should be more peaceful.
Where are you going?
But our CEO,
Ohio. Jody's family for a couple days.
our CEO is there.
What?
Right in Pittsburgh.
Ohio.
And we're going.
Oh, you're going to Pittsburgh? Nice.
Our CEO was there. She had to come back on a plane on a boat 18 hours to Cyprus.
Wow.
Otherwise she wouldn't be able to get out.
Unbelievable. It's crazy times.
Matt's white coat.
What's that? Oh, really?
Yeah.
Mazel tov.
Pittsburgh running
Mazel tov. Okay, here we go. Good Shabbos. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Beini uven v'nei Yisrael oti leolam, oti leolam. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai es ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Oh no, we did that one already. Uvayom hashvi Shabbat vaynafash, Shabbat vaynafash, Shabbat vaynafash. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Amen. L'chaim. Okay. Everyone have a sheet this time? Yeah, okay. Blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei. Amen. Okay, so we've had a request. If you speak, if you could please use a microphone. That way the people at home can hear you. That's why I wear a mic, because there's thousands of people around the world who are tuned in to hear this. So people want to hear you at home when you speak. Nobody here wants to hear you, but people at home, apparently they do. So, all right. Torah portion this week is called Pinchas. And it's, there's three parts to it that deal with leadership. Rabbi Greengrass mentioned them last night. One of them is the daughters of Zelophehad, which we're not going to talk about, because not in our portion of the Torah this week, in the second triennial cycle. There's the story of, obviously, Pinchas, who is the one at the end who kills the Israelite man and Midianite women who are having these affairs and worshiping idols, and that stops the plague that's killing all the people because Balak got the advice from Bilam that I can't curse them, but just get these Midianite women to tempt them and the men, and before they tempt the men, to get the men to bow down to their idols, and then they'll destroy themselves because God will punish them for worshiping idols, and they do. And Pinchas was. But there's a third model of leadership that I wanted to focus on today, and that is the ascension of Joshua to be the one who's going to take over for Moses. And if you had to think about it, there are other possibilities. It didn't necessarily have to be Joshua that was going to be the successor. It could have been Aaron. It could have been Miriam. A little more radical, maybe, but could have been Miriam. It could have been Elazar or Pinchas, the priests who came after Nadav and Avihu and after Aaron. It could have been Pinchas. It could have been Kalev, who was the other good spy who came back with Joshua. It could have been Bezalel, who built the Mishkan. Could have been Aholiab, who helped him. But it was Joshua. Now, one of the things that you see, if you remember from last week, we talked about the battle that the Israelites had with Amalek. And while Moses and Aaron were up on the mountain, we don't know much about what was going on during the battle, but we do know who was leading the battle, which was Joshua. So if there's one thing that we know about Joshua up until now, it's that he was a military leader. And you see, you especially see this in Israel, that there's a huge preponderance of generals who then become political figures. In fact, it's the most common way usually in Israeli society to become a political leader is to come from the military. Not everybody. Golda was not exactly a war general. But most of them were. Shimon Peres is different role, but not really a fighter. But most of them, if you look back, played significant roles. In fact, one of the things that's holding Yair Lapid back was that, you know what he did when he was in the military? He was a journalist. That doesn't impress too many Israelis. If you're not an elite soldier, but you know what the problem is, though? If you have a cabinet full of generals, they all pretty much think the same way. And you're only getting one viewpoint. On the other hand, when it's good to have a cabinet of generals? During wartime. Yeah. So it's good for, it's good for some things, but it's, I think, what they call groupthink. They all think the same way. You're not getting, maybe you want to have an economist in there, or, someone. Now, sometimes these generals are also economists, whatever, but, Bibi was an elite soldier. He also went to MIT, So, okay. Joshua, though, what we know about him is he's a wartime soldier. He's a wartime leader. He's a general. And that's the one that Moses picks. However, what we see, especially as we get into the book of Numbers, that there's some other things about Joshua that make him an intriguing choice. And I think when we circle back around, after we look at all the reasons why Joshua gets chosen, that it ultimately comes to an unbelievable conclusion. So it may be boring for about 48 minutes, but when you get to the end, it should be incredible. But you have to build up to understand it. So I want to focus today on Joshua and why Joshua becomes the leader after Moses dies, and also Joshua is the one who leads the Jewish people into the land of Israel, which is a pretty big. It's like a nice thing to have on your resume. Right. Okay. if any of you ever saw the movie, what's it called? Catch a Right? Something Arising. Is an Israel movie with Yul Brenner and the Mickey Marcus movie with Kirk Douglas. Cast a Giant Shadow. There's a line where David Ben-Gurion's character says to Mickey Marcus, "How would you like to be the first Jewish general since Joshua?" Yeah. I mean, there were some others. We sort of missed King David, but it was a nice line. All right. So we want to look now at Numbers chapter 27. Verse 15. Well, verse 12. And this is the scene where Moses ordains Joshua as the next leader. So Numbers chapter 27, verse 12. Yeah. Right, of course. Moses was picked by God too. Right. Yeah. Good point. I didn't mean to say that he was picked by Moses. Obviously, he's chosen by God. Moses is just the one who does the ordination ceremony. Okay. Everyone have verse 12, Norman? Okay, here we go.
The Eternal One said to Moses, "Ascend these heights of Abarim and view the land that I have given to the Israelite people. When you have seen it, you too shall be gathered to your kin, just as your brother Aaron was. For in the wilderness of Zin, when the community was contentious, you disobeyed my command to uphold my sanctity in their sight by means of the water. Those are the waters of the Meribah Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin."
Right. So, by the way, I didn't mention when Moses, other people he could have picked. You know who Moses wanted to be the next leaders? His sons. And the Midrash says that Moses, when God said Joshua, Moses said, are you sure? Which is a funny thing to say, because you're saying to God, like, God, are you mistaken? Right. Like sometimes people say that to me, like, I'm like, what are you, nuts? Yeah, I'm like, are you crazy? Yeah. But what just happened between verse 12 and verse 14? Why now that that Joshua is going to be chosen as a leader? Why now do we have this reminder? God just reminded Moses, remember you did that thing with the rock? You're done. In case you forgot, you and your brother Aaron hit the rock. You should have spoke to the rock. And so because of that, now I've got to choose someone new. Right? It's like when a boss comes in to be fired, or when a boss comes in to fire someone, it's like, you did this, so now I have to fire you. And the person's like, no, you don't. You're the boss. I'm like, well, good point, but you're out. Nobody likes you. So Moses, though, is being reminded. It's a little harsh. Why you're out. And now that you're out, we need to replace you. So that's where we are now. Okay, so let's keep going. Now, verse 15.
Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, "Let the Lord, source of the breath of all flesh, appoint someone over the community who shall go out before them and come in before them, and who shall take them out and bring them in, so that the Lord's community may not be like sheep that have no shepherd." And the Lord answered Moses, "Single out Joshua, son of Nun, an inspired man, and lay your hand upon him."
Okay, so now I ask the question, what does that mean, an inspired man? And the word, ruach, I didn't bring any of the sources. But if we went for this particular issue, but if I would go now back through the sources, I could show you all the different times that ruach means Nevuah. You ever heard this word, nevuah? You know what a navi is? You know the second book of the Tanakh, you have the Torah, and then the Nevi'im, prophets. Nevuah means prophecy. And so to have, inspired is, we're limited by the English. But the word ruach in Hebrew, if you go through and look at all of the different times that it's mentioned in the Torah, it refers many of those times to someone who has what we would call nevuah. Now, and nevuah means someone who is a prophet. So when it says here, and the Lord answered Moses, single out Joshua, son of Nun, an inspired man, what he's saying is he's also a prophet. Okay, so that's where we are so far. Okay, so let's pick, and then lay your hands upon him. Okay, verse 19.
Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and before the whole community, and commission him in their sight. Invest him with some of your authority, so that the whole Israelite community may obey.
Okay, now if I were to pick the one verse in the entire Torah that if you didn't read in Hebrew, you'd have no chance of understanding it, it might be this one.
This one, okay.
But invest with some of your authority. What it's saying is this verse 20? Yeah.
Yeah.
No wonder. That's why I brought the Rashi, because that makes no sense. So what does it mean, invest with your authority? So if you look at the Rashi on the page, Ed, would you mind reading the three Rashis there, 27, 20?
Sure. And thou shalt put some of thy glory upon him. This refers to the shining of the skin of his countenance.
Okay, so remember Moses had that shiny face? It wasn't just because, there's a lot of dermatological jokes there, but that's not why. I don't know if we talked about this, but when the Jewish people were about to get the Torah, God put a crown on each of their heads, and they were shining. But when they committed a sin with the golden calf, God took all of that shininess and put it on Moses. And that's where the shine came from. So I don't know if the people didn't actually have crowns. I mean, maybe they actually had crowns, but I think what God did was he made every Jew who was at Mount Sinai have like a little bit of shine. Like you're out in the sun for like a few hours, not like you were, some people go to St. Thomas and they sit in the sun for 6 days and they come back and you don't recognize them. It's just like you were out for like an hour. So you got a little sun. All right, so they got a little bit. But God, that's, hundreds of thousands of people. But then they committed the sin of the golden calf. God said, you lost it. I'm giving it all to Moses who was up here. Okay, so that's where Moses came down really shiny. So what we're saying, though, is Moses is now taking some of that shine and giving it to Aaron, giving it to Joshua. Which means whatever it was that the Jewish people felt at the moment they got the Torah, that's how Joshua feels now from Moses. I mean, maybe degraded a little because it's Moses and not God, but still pretty good. So it's not like he's just saying, I'm investing you with some of my authority. Right? That's like me saying to, Cantor Flaxman, you can do Tat Shabbat. It's not that. That's not a good translation. He's saying, I'm giving you some of what God gave me in the prophetic world. Okay, so that's the first Rashi. Second Rashi.
Some of thy glory, and not all thy glory. Consequently, we learn from this, Moses' face beamed like the sun, Joshua's face only like the moon.
Right. So we see that we learn that in the Midrash, and also it's mentioned in the Talmud that Moses was the sun and Joshua was the moon. Okay. So, and what we mean by that is he was shiny more than most people, but not as much as Moses. Okay. What does that mean? It means his prophecy wasn't as powerful. Okay. By the way, neither was anyone else. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, they spoke to God through dreams. Moses was the only one who was able to speak in real time because he was smarter. His prophecy powers were higher. Okay, last one.
That all the congregation of the children of Israel should be obedient to him, that they should comport themselves toward him with respect and reverence in the same way as they comport themselves towards you.
Right, which is a funny thing to say because they never listen to Moses. They're always complaining against him. But yeah, can you use the microphone? Pass this back. Victor.
So the first time that the word ruach occurs in the Torah is in Bereshit, and is connected to the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. So I mean, this is I think it tries to tell us that Joshua has the Spirit of God, or he's been chosen specifically by God.
Yeah. Very nice. And that's when God went to start to create the world. V'ruach Elokim merachefet al pnei hamayim. Right? That's Genesis 1:2. Very good connection. And if you, one of the things that you see is you look through Onkelos. Onkelos was the first Aramaic translation of the Torah about 2,000 years ago. And Onkelos, when he was translating ruach into the Hebrew word into Aramaic, he translated it to nevuah, which tells us that in Mishnaic times, people understood, about 2,000 years ago, people understood that the word ruach meant prophecy, right, which is interesting. Okay. I could have brought 36 sources like that, but I thought I'd just tell you instead. All right, now, here's a question. It's kind of a hard question. What do we know about Joshua from the book of Numbers before this? Because one of the things I told you was what we know about Joshua from Exodus was he was a general. He was a warrior. But what else do we know about him from the book of Numbers? So what I want to do right now is just show you, because I also want to ask the question. Here's the main question we're trying to answer. Why Joshua? There were other prophets. There were other people that could have done the job. Aaron could have done the job. Aaron could have been excused from hitting the rock, because Moses was the one who actually hit the rock. Why not Miriam? Miriam could have done the job. Why not Pinchas? Why not Moses' children? And there's reasons why. But instead of asking the reasons why they weren't chosen, what I want to try to do is figure out the specific reason why Joshua was chosen. Why not Bezalel? Okay, whatever. So we need to do a little more research on who was Joshua. Between chapters 11, 12, and 13 of Numbers, there are different things that involve Joshua that I want to show you. So this is going to be annoying because we're going to have to skip around a little bit. But if you'll skip with me to chapter 11, verse 25. Numbers 11:25. If anyone has the page in Plout, if you could shout it out. Oh, look at that. That's cool. 1094 in Plout. 11:25. If you don't want to find it, I'll just read it. So you don't have to find it, but you can trust me that it's there. Okay, so here we go. I just want to read you a few, beginning with Numbers 11:25 or 12. Begin with 24. Moses went out and repeated the words of the Lord to the people. He gathered 70 of the people's elders and stationed them around the tent. Then the Lord came down in a cloud and spoke to him. He drew upon the spirit that was on him and put it upon the 70 elders. And when the Spirit rested upon them, in other words, when I gave them prophecy, right, the Ruach, they spoke in ecstasy, whatever that means, but did not continue. Two men weren't chosen, right, because there were 72 elders, but only 70 were chosen. So and they became Eldad, these two guys, Eldad and Medad. So two men, one Eldad and the other Medad, had remained in the camp. Yet the Spirit rested upon them, meaning they also somehow got this power of prophecy. They were among those recorded, but they had not gone out to the tent, and they spoke in ecstasy in the camp. A youth ran and told Moses, saying, Eldad and Medad are acting the prophet in the camp. Now, look, the reason I'm bringing this is because Joshua now is involved. This is one of the stories that we learn something about Joshua. And what do we know about Joshua so far? He's a military guy. And Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' attendant from his youth. Okay, so now we just learned one other thing about Moses. One other thing about Joshua in his biography. What's another biographical note? From the time he was a kid, a youth, he was Moses' attendant. All right? So he was always around Moses, right? So he spoke up and said, "My Lord Moses, restrain them." But Moses said to him, "Are you wrought up upon my account? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord put his spirit upon them." Moses then re-entered the camp with the elders of Israel. So you have these two guys who are acting like prophets, and they're saying all this crazy stuff. And Joshua comes to Moses and says, "Who do these guys think they are? They're taking your job." And Moses says, "I got no problem. If everyone wants to speak to God, be my guest." Moses is super humble. But the Talmud tells us what they were saying. So if you look now at the second source, Rashi on Numbers 11:28, this again is going to involve Joshua. Another explanation is that the word means put them into prison. He said because they were prophesying. And what were they saying? They're saying Moses will die and Joshua will bring the people into the land. So Joshua heard that and said, "How dare they?" Joshua's trying to protect his master. And what they're saying is he's going to die and I'm going to take over. And one of the things you see about Joshua now is he has the same, some people would say, "All right, Moses,
My turn.
you looked a little older. I didn't want to say anything. You're not looking that great. I don't know what you were doing with that rock, but you're out. And, I'm going to be the one to take him into Joshua." That's not Joshua. Joshua is just as humble as Moses. Joshua says, "How dare you say that about Moses?" Most people are like, "How dare you say that?" That's not Joshua. Joshua's, okay. So he has now, we've just learned a few things about Joshua. One, he's a military guy. Two, he was also Moses' attendant, which means he was also hanging around Moses. And three, he's humble. And it says a lot going on there. Okay, now, we could go back and look at it, but in Exodus chapter 24, you know what, we kind of need it. I'll just read it real quick. If you want to look with me, it's Exodus 24, verse 1. I'm sorry. That's right. Exodus 20. A lot of numbers. Exodus 24, verse 1. Anyone have it? Would you mind reading it? Do you have a microphone? Someone have a mic over there? Oh, again, yeah. Okay. Would you read? So there's a story here. The first 14 verses.
Then he said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel, and bow low from afar. Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but the others shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with him." Moses went and repeated to the people all the commands of the Lord and all the rules, and all the people answered with one voice, saying, "All the things that the Lord has commanded we will do." Moses then wrote down all the commands of the Lord. Early in the morning he set up an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He designated some young men among the Israelites, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed bulls as offerings of well-being to the Lord. Moses took one part of the blood and put it in basins, and the other part of the blood he dashed against the altar. Then he took the record of the covenant and read it aloud to the people, and they said, "All that the Lord has spoken we will faithfully do." Moses took the blood and dashed it on the people and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord now makes with you concerning all these commands." Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel ascended, and they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet there was the likeness of a pavement of sapphire, like the very sky for purity. Yet he did not raise his hand against the leaders of the Israelites. They beheld God, and they ate and drank. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the teachings and commandments which I have inscribed to instruct them." So Moses and his attendant Joshua arose, and Moses ascended the mountain of God. To the elders he had said, "Wait here for us until we return to you. You have Aaron and Hur with you. Let anyone who has a legal matter approach them."
Okay. So what I wanted to show you, hang on 1 second. Okay. If you look now, what are the two great sins of the Jewish people in the once they leave Egypt? The golden calf and sin of the spies. So one of the things we know about the sin of the spies was there were 12 spies and Joshua was one of them. Now how many of the 12 spies came back with a bad report? 10. And how many didn't? 2. Who were they? Look, this is me.
Can we leave now?
How many reform no, all right. Okay. So one of the things we know is Joshua is absolved from the sin of the spies. So if you were going to say he can't be a leader, if he would have been one of the bad spies, he wouldn't have got the job as the leader. But he was a good spy. And he said, no problem, we can do it. But now we have a problem, though, because Joshua was at the golden calf. And so, Aaron was in charge. But we know Moses was the only one who went up to the top of the mountain. Everyone else was not at the top of the mountain. And so the people came to Aaron and they forced him to do it. And first they went to Hor, and then Hor wouldn't help them, so they killed Hor. So Aaron said, I'm not going to get killed. Take your gold, whatever, the calf. And the whole time we asked the question, where was Joshua? So now you come here to what we just read, and you look at verse 13. And it says, well, if we look at verse 12, then the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and wait there, and I'll give you the stone tablets with the teachings and the commandments, etc. And verse 13, so Moses and his attendant Joshua rose, and Moses ascended the mountain of God, which we learn here. So look, better Rashi than me. If you look at the third source now, Rashi on Exodus 24:13. Someone, Shelley, Bill, would you mind reading that one? I am not sure.
I am not sure in what capacity Joshua appears here, but I think that as a disciple, he was accompanying the teacher as far as the place where the bounds of the mountain were marked out, whence onward he was not permitted to proceed. From that point, Moses alone ascended the mountain of God, whilst Joshua pitched his tent there and stayed there during the whole 40 days which Moses spent on the mountain. For thus we find that when Moses came down from the mountain, it states, and Joshua heard the voice of the people that they shouted, from which we may infer that he was not with them in the camp.
Right. If it wasn't for Exodus 24:13, you would not be able to absolve Joshua of the sin of the golden calf. So you see what just happened there is Joshua's the only Jew who wasn't involved with either of the two sins. He's like the only guy left that could be a leader. Because what God said was, according to this Rashi, which he's taking from the Midrash, that Joshua went up part way up the mountain, but enough of the mountain to be away from what was happening. However, Joshua ultimately does hear what's happening, and he's not sure what's happening. So if you look in, I'll just read it, but if you look in Exodus 32, this is a famous verse, verse 17, it says, when Joshua heard the sound of the people and its boisterousness, meaning he started to hear something really loud and he wasn't sure what it was. And how do we know that he didn't know what it was? Because he describes the scene. And what's the only thing we know about Joshua so far? He's a general, he's a warrior. So look what he says to Moses. There is a cry of war in the camp. He uses the word milchama. There's milchama. I hear war. And Moses comes down and says, I don't think that's a war. We'll go see what it is. But Joshua, as a military guy, said, I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Big Lebowski. One of the funniest movies of all time. And John Goodman in the movie, he's a veteran of Vietnam. And no matter what happens in the movie, it's because of Vietnam. and like they're bowl a lot, and so the guy will give him the wrong size shoe, and he'll start, I didn't lie face down in the muck and watch my comrades die in Vietnam. And and the other actor will go, this has nothing to do with Vietnam, man. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. But that's Joshua. That's Joshua. It's war. And Moses is like, look, it's not war. Doesn't look good, but it's not war. But Moses, that's his mindset. That's what the Torah wants us to think. Every time Joshua, it's war. Moses is like, it's not war. Okay. But what the point of showing you this, though, was more to say he wasn't at the golden calf. Now, you would say to me, I know he wasn't part of the sin of the spies. The Torah is clear on that. But it's a little more hidden to find out that he was halfway up the mountain, which is interesting. Okay. All right. Now, I just want to show you a few scenes in two more scenes in Numbers. Again, you don't. I'll just read it, but it's if you want to, like for fun, follow along. It's 12:8, chapter 12, verse 8 of Numbers. Now, this is the story. Remember when Miriam and Aaron are gossiping about Moses, and they're talking about Moses' wife, and then Miriam gets the leprosy, and Moses prays to heal her. Okay, so. Okay. So in verse 12:8, it says, with him I speak mouth to mouth, plainly and not in riddles. He beholds the likeness of the Lord, meaning Moses is a better prophet than you two. How then did you not shrink from speaking against my servant Moses? Still incensed with them, the Lord departed. Okay, now, what you just saw, really, was the elimination of Aaron and Miriam as possible successors. Because you two don't seem to understand prophecy well enough to do the job. Okay. Now, the first story I showed you was about Eldad and Medad, and Joshua gets involved. The second story here I show you involves Miriam and Aaron. Joshua's not directly involved, but indirectly this is now clearing the way for him. And it's also a story about what? Prophecy. What were Eldad and Medad doing that Joshua gets involved? They're prophesying. What are Miriam and Aaron doing here? They're messing up prophecy. And so we're starting to develop a theme here, moving away from Joshua as just the military guy who says, I think there's a war every time he turns around, to now he's a guy who's more skilled at prophecy than anybody else. Okay? So that's two stories, and there's one more. In the next chapter, chapter 13, verse 16, where it says, those were the names of the men whom Moses sent to scout the land. So we list the 12 names of the spies. Okay, fine. But then there's an added piece of information here, which says, those were the names of the men and women whom Moses sent to scout the land, but Moses changed the name of Hoshea, son of Nun, to Joshua. Now, we already know him as Joshua, and probably Moses changed his name a long time ago from Hoshea to Yehoshua, meaning that he added a yud, meaning that he added the letter, the name of God to the beginning of his name to say, you talk to God. The difference between you and the rest of the spies is that you're talking directly to God. And so what you saw now is in chapter 11, chapter 12, and chapter 13, we have something with Joshua that has to do with prophecy. And what we're doing is we're elevating him from you just thought that he was a military leader to no, he's a guy who talks to God. Because if he's a guy who talks to God, why was he the military leader down below fighting? Shouldn't he have been on top of the mountain? Let Aaron go fight. Let someone else go fight. Let Pinchas go fight. if he's such a great prophet, don't we need him up there with Moses on the top? Well, he started off down below, but he worked his way up. Okay. Okay. Now that all of that is clear, God willing, now this gets good. All right. All that was prologue. One more bit of information before we get to this last piece of Talmud that will hopefully bring it all together. Does anyone know there's a famous, Maimonides started his description of he wrote a book called Sefer HaMitzvot, where he talks about what all the different mitzvahs are and explains them, and he started his introduction there with this piece from Pirkei Avot. But does anyone know what proof maybe not, but the Orthodox world, what proof do we have in the Orthodox world that the oral law, the law that was told to Moses on Mount Sinai but wasn't written down, is the same law we have today? Does anyone know what proof they use? It's from Pirkei Avot. Does that help anybody? What does it say? Right. So what it says in I should have brought it, but I'll just tell you what it says. It says in Pirkei Avot that Moses received the Torah on Mount Sinai, and he passed it to Joshua. The first guy to hear it from Moses was Joshua. Everyone else heard it secondhand. The only person who heard the oral law from Moses, from the guy who was there, was Joshua. Joshua then told it to the elders of Israel. And the elders of Israel told it to the heads of the tribes. And the heads of the tribes told it to the people. And so it was all passed down from Mount Sinai. But the elders, the 70 elders, the elders of Israel, they heard it from Joshua. Joshua can't prove that God said it. He didn't hear it. He only heard it from Moses. I mean, you could say, look, I have a pretty good source. I heard it from Moses. I used to have an uncle. I had my great uncle who was one of the funniest men I ever knew. His point in life was to drive my grandmother crazy. That was the whole goal of his life. And he was one of these guys like out of Seinfeld. I don't know if I've ever told you before about him, but he lived in Boynton, at Del Boca Vista, and and every once in a while. Yeah, of course. Every once in a while. I mean, this guy was right out of Central Casting. Every once in a while, when my parents were in Boca, we'd invite him for Thanksgiving or whatever. And 9 out of 10 times, he would get in a fight with the lady at the guard gate because she's an anti-Semite. 9 out of 10 times. And this was before anti-Semitism. This is like before October 7th. This is talking 20 years ago. Because my parents live in a gated community in Boca, and he'd come in, and inevitably we'd get we're sitting there, where is he? We'd get a call from the gate. This guy says he knows you. He thinks everyone's an anti-Semite. I mean, every year. So I remember, he passed away a few years ago. He was one of the funniest guys. One time he said, I think it was when Hillary was running against Obama in the primary. And he came out, and we were sitting at dinner, and he goes, Hillary's an anti-Semite. I mean, he thought everyone was an anti-Semite, but he only said that to annoy my grandmother. And then she would blow up. You don't know. And after, she would go crazy for about 20 minutes. And then he said, and finally, and how do you know that? And he goes, I heard it from the guy who started the rumor. And that was like, I never forgot that line. I was laughing for a month. So, I wish I could bring, if he was still alive, I'd bring him as a scholar in residence to talk about anti-Semitism. So, okay. But think about how profound this is. Moses got it from God. Okay, so Moses is going to believe it. What is he gonna say? God, are you sure about the thing with the meat and the milk? It doesn't. It sounds to me like it would taste better. Like what? What are you talking about? No, Moses. Okay, God said. That's what he said. So Moses tells it to Joshua, and Joshua says, "Well, Moses was just up there for 40 days and 40 nights. He didn't eat or drink. I was like halfway up. I could kind of see what was going on. It looked weird. There was the lightning and the fire, and came back down, and it was shiny. I'm going to believe him." So now you're an elder hearing it from Joshua. And you would probably believe him, but the fact is, he didn't hear it from God. He heard it from Moses. But now if you hear it from Joshua, you're saying there's no connection. So Joshua is the only person who ever lived who heard it from Moses directly. Now, by the way, it wasn't that hard to just say, Joshua's wrong. Because if one of the elders said, Joshua seems a little confused by this, you know what they could do? Go to Moses. He was still around. Say, Moses, Joshua doesn't seem to get this. And by the way, one of the things that happened, one of the very first things that happened to Joshua was he forgot a lot of it. The Talmud tells us he actually forgot a whole bunch of laws. And then Moses had to relearn it because it was too much pressure. Yes? You have you have?
Yeah.
Smart. We finally put one there. Yeah.
Do you think there's any symbolism in the fact that Joshua was halfway up the mountain in between Moses and the people?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I think that tells the whole story, is that he was next in line. And also, it also tells, I think, that he was a better connector to the people than Moses. Because Moses was like, you didn't talk to Moses. Moses was always in the Holy of Holies dealing with God. But Joshua was more a man of the people. He wasn't in the Holy of Holies. Although they say he sat outside of it because he never left Moses' side. But he was outside of it where he could talk to the people. And so he was more of a bridge, to the people than Moses was. And maybe that's why he had to lead them into the land. If Moses did, it would have been a different experience. It would have brought in the Messianic era, which the world wasn't ready for that. So, okay. Now let's try to make some sense of all of this, because there's one more piece to this that's wonderful. Now, one of the things you might say is, why is it, if this is the Torah portion that Joshua is crowned, if this is where he takes the hod, the word is the hod. Hod means glory, but it has a much more deep Kabbalistic meaning. It's one of the sfirot of the Kabbalah. And this is what Moses is giving to Joshua. And this is Joshua's big moment. It's a bit ironic that the Torah portion is not called Joshua. It's called Pinchas. So, and now Pinchas does something pretty cool. He has got the spear. I once had a fantasy football team named Pinchas's Spear. But it was all rabbis in the league, so there was a greater appreciation than you might otherwise. Okay, so why, though, is the Torah portion named Pinchas? And is there a connection between Pinchas and Joshua? So, if we went deeper, we could also then extend it to the daughters of Zelophehad, but I'm not going to have time to really go that deep. But it's still pretty deep to say, well, what's the connection between Joshua and Pinchas? So there's a Gemara, there's a Talmud here at the bottom of the page from a tractate called Sota, which talks about where Pinchas comes from. And you have to understand where Pinchas comes from. Now, by the way, the end of the story is, as I said in the beginning, Bilam last week tried to curse the Jews, and every time it came out a blessing. And it didn't work. But at the end, Bilam gives advice to Balak and says, I can't curse them. The only way you're going to defeat the Jews is if they defeat themselves. So if you can get them to worship idols, then you won't have to kill them. God will kill them for you. So, he gives them advice. The women of Midian, they also hate the Jews. And the Midianites also hate the Jews. They might be willing to tell them. And the Midianites have some pretty good-looking women. So send them over. They'll tempt the Jewish men. And they'll tell them, we won't have relations with you until you bow down to our God. And then when they bow down to their God will punish them. And that's what happened. This plague starts. But then this one Jewish guy goes into a tent with one of the Midianite women, and Pinchas takes a spear, and he kills them both, and the plague ends. Okay. It's very graphic, actually. If you have to read through the Talmud, you learn the whole story. You don't need it. But what's important is that there's a connection between Midian and Pinchas. Now, before the Midianites. But here's another question. Does anyone know who Midian was, the original Midian? No? That's a different guy? Midian was well before Yitro. Midian's back. The guy named Midian. Jethro was from Midian. But who was the original guy named Midian? You know, like Amerigo Vespucci? America? Who was America? Who was Midian? Who was the first guy named Midian? So, if you remember the story, it goes back to Genesis. Abraham, after Sarah dies, Abraham remarries. He marries a woman named Keturah. Rashi tells us that Keturah is Hagar. That he actually goes back and rekindles the flame with Hagar. But the Torah uses the name Keturah. Whether that's a name for Hagar, you could argue with Rashi or not. But they have a son. Or they have a few sons. Hagar and Abraham. And one of them is a guy named Midian. And what it says there in Genesis is Abraham gave gifts to Midian and his brothers, but all that he had in terms of his inheritance went to Isaac and Jacob, ultimately through Jacob. So Midian are the people of Abraham who don't inherit the land of Israel. And they end up on the east bank of the Jordan River, and they have a gripe. And the reason they hate the Jews so much is they say, we're from Abraham too. Why do you get all the good land and we get just this piece of desert over here? And you get all this wonderful, beautiful land that's supposedly the Holy Land and all, and everyone loves this land, and you guys get it, and we don't, and we have the same father. And so the Midianites are these people who live on the other side of the Dead Sea who have a gripe against us and hate us. They're still there. They're still there. They just have a different name. All right. Okay, clear so far? Okay, so now, someone have a microphone? Sherry, would you mind reading the Talmud at the bottom of the page? Atana taught.
Achana taught, it was not for nothing that specifically Pinchas went to war with Midian. Rather, it was to exact the rightful judgment of his mother's father, Joseph, as it is stated. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's. The Gemara asks,
Okay, so, what just happened? Pinchas why was it Pinchas that rose up to kill this Jew who was having this relationship with the Midianite woman in the plague? Because because Pinchas came from his mother's father was Joseph. But now, wait a minute. We have a huge problem with that. The Talmud's about to ask a huge problem. What are you talking about? Isn't Pinchas one of the priests? If he's a priest, he's got to be from the tribe of Levi. How could he be from the tribe of Joseph? Joseph's not from the tribe of Levi. So Joseph was split up into two tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. But if he's a Levite, and if his father is a priest, presumably his father had to marry someone who's also a priest, which would mean he's from the tribe of Levi. So that's the question of the Talmud. Okay, so now the Talmud, that's why the Gemara asks, okay.
The Gemara asks, is this to say that Pinchas came on his mother's side from the family of Joseph? But it is written, and Eleazar, Aaron's son, took himself a wife from the daughter of Putiel, and she bore him Pinchas. What is it not that Pinchas came from the family of Yitro, who was also called Putiel because he was fattened calves for idol worship? The answer, no. He was descended from Joseph, who mocked his desire by resisting the advances of Potiphar's wife.
Okay, so there was another interpretation that said, because we know who Pinchas's mother is, and we thought that he actually that his mother descended from Jethro. Now Jethro converted, so we thought that he descended from that line, and Jethro's daughter marries Moses, which is a Levite family. And so it was assumed that Jethro and his family came into the Levites. But they say, no, you got the Hebrew wrong. That's not what we learn from that name Putiel. What we learn is that there's another word, Peit, which is where we take it from. So the whole point of this is to say that Pinchas is from the tribe of Joseph. Okay? You don't have to get so caught up in the Hebrew gymnastics that they're doing here to get you there. But the whole point is to say that what Pinchas, while he is on his father's side a Levite, his mother's side came from Joseph. Who cares? It was a big deal. Until I tell you, what tribe did Joshua come from? Ephraim. Ephraim is the son of Joseph. So the connection between Pinchas and Joshua is they both have a connection to Joseph. Okay. Now, what ultimately, and some of the rabbis will argue this, but to close the loop, what we've developed so far is the reason that Joshua was chosen as the leader. He started out, yes, as a there are three things we would say about Joseph. About Joshua. So many names. Three things we'd say about Joshua. One, he's a military leader. Two, we proved, I think, that he's a prophet, right? And we saw all the different, and we proved that he was a prophet even greater than Aaron and Miriam. Maybe I'll say a third thing. Three, he's humble, like Moses, which is what you have to be. And four, he's the only one who heard the oral law and heard the whole Torah from the source, or at least firsthand from Moses. So all of those things paint him as a leader. But I think there's one more symbolic idea. Because what Joshua is going to be most famous for is bringing the Jewish people into the land of Israel and conquering the land of Israel. I mean, he's famous for a lot of things, but that's, the top of his resume was, not only was he the one who brought the Jewish people into the land of Israel, he's the first person in history to ever bring the entire Jewish nation into the land of Israel. Because before we were there, before we were slaves, there was no nation. It was just a family. Now we've got hundreds of thousands of Jews, for the first time, making Aliyah, coming to the land of Israel. But what set off the whole experience of the Jews in Egypt? The sale of Joseph. It was the sale of Joseph that started the whole thing. How did the Jews end up in Egypt in the first place? Why did they stay there? Because Joseph was there. Joseph got them jobs, and Joseph gave them food, and Joseph told them to stay here. And it wouldn't have happened if there wasn't a sale of Joseph. And Joseph was sold by his brothers to the Ishmaelites. But the Ishmaelites then sold Joseph to the Midianites. The Midianites were the ones who brought Joseph to Egypt. The Midianites, that's why they're involved again. And so when Pinchas kills the Midianite, who sold Joseph into slavery into Egypt, and Joshua and Pinchas from the tribe of Joseph are going to lead the Jewish people back into the land of Israel, we're closing the loop and finally getting atonement for that original sin of selling Joseph into slavery. And so in the final analysis, yes, Joshua was a warrior. Yes, he was a great prophet. Yes, he was humble. Yes, he was Moses' attendant. But all of those things wouldn't have worked out the way they did if he didn't come from the tribe of Joseph. Because what we needed to do ultimately was to fix that sin of the sale of Joseph. And you know what was the redemption? What was the final moment that finally forgave the Jewish people and all the tribes for the sin of selling Joseph into slavery that brought them out of the land of Israel? Crossing back into Israel through the Jordan River from where the Midianites lived into the land of Israel, led by someone from the tribe of Joshua, spurred on by another guy with a spear from the tribe of Joseph, also from the tribe of Joseph. And that's why Joshua became the leader after Moses. Okay? All right. Shabbat Shalom. All right. Temple Beth Ram is not doing so well. If I would have picked Scheffler, I'd be killing it. You know, people could say that. But if Scheffler fades, unlikely. Yeah, I know, that's a problem. And you got a real shot. I thought Ram was hot. I thought he was going to play well this week. You know what? So this guy, but you know what? What's his name? DeChambeau is +7. He's now -2. Yeah, he shot. He shot great.
Well, and thank God,
Came on the number.
but for me, thank God Wyndham Clark, who also was the same when he played yesterday. He went from +5 to even, and then he was a couple under early.
I almost picked him.
He's -4 today. So you're doing good.
I'd like to see Finau make a run because no one else has it. So
I know. That's
No,
your guy.
I need Rye too. I need Rye.
Ryan, he stinks. He started off great. He was like 4 under after 8 holes, and I said, this guy's not going to make the cut. You know, he's gonna collapse.
I don't come to every Torah Study, but this was a good one.
Interesting, right?
Wasn't so. We know that Joshua was a prophet. All the guys that you
Have a great trip.
All right.
Enjoy.
Shabbat Shalom. See you in a little bit.
See you later, Bill. All the guys that you mentioned, who could possibly have taken over, weren't they all prophets? Weren't they all prophets?
I don't know if his kids were, but the rest of them were. Yeah.
But if his kids did take over, then naturally he would have become a prophet.
But yeah,
Because he would have shed his light on.
they were prophets, but they all had either they were at the golden calf,
But they had issues.
or they were guilty of the sin of the spy.
Disqualifying events.
Aaron and Miriam gossip. I mean, they all had something that disqualified them except Joshua.
Is the shine called Karen?
What?
The shine and the light.
Karen, yeah.
Karen.
Yeah.
That's where I guess.
That's where Michelangelo got the horn.
Yes.
Because Karen also means horn in Hebrew.
I thought it was supposed to be lightning.
Shabbat Shalom.
When we get back.
Yeah, for
Have
sure.
you ever seen the Moses?
It's very. I saw it.
In the
I walked into this church and there it was, and I didn't even realize it was going to be
St.
there.
Peter in chains.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And the guy didn't even point it out. I'm like, is this
Does
the
some of
actual-
it have to do with the fact that of all the men who went to spy, he was the one who put things in perspective, and he was the one who was the most believable?
Sure. Because he had to be. Because if he didn't, it would have ruined the rest of the story. Because he would have been disqualified. So then we would have real trouble.
When do you get back from Ohio?
What's that?
When do you get back from Ohio? How long are you there?
Just tonight until Thursday. So I'll be back here Friday.
Okay.
I'll be back here Thursday, but back in
That's
office
what
on
we're
Friday.
leaving. So
Then I'm
good
here.
work.
Then I'm here for the
duration.
till like Hanukkah. So,
Have a good safe
all
trip.
right, Shabbat Shalom.
So I was thinking,
Yes.
as I do. All right. You were saying Joshua was, so I was thinking Joshua was the right guy to bring the Israel people into Israel, the Jewish people into Israel. Just like it seems Netanyahu is the right guy to save it,
Maybe.
as evidenced by the last month's activities. And then I was reading a little bit his paternal grandfather, because Joshua is from Joseph, so I'm thinking, okay, where's Netanyahu from? His paternal grandfather is Nathan. I'm sure you know better
Well,
than I
we're
do.
all Jews today are from from Judah or Levi. They're the only tribes that are left.
Okay, so he's already got that base
Yeah,
covered.
since he's not a Levite, he's from Judah.
Right, and who was
Which
the
is
right
good. That
guy.
the Messiah is going to come from Judah. So.
Right. So
Yeah, he could be from the line of King David.
Yeah, so it seems that evidenced by what the actions, maybe it seems he's the right guy to save it.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I
So
sure hope.
Yeah.
I hope
right.
so. Well, we're going to need people after him too. So.
Of course.
But so far so good.
Yeah.
This week anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, I saw you sent me an email. I haven't had a chance to answer that question yet.
No, it wasn't a question. It was just
Or
a
whatever it
comment.
was.
When you were talking about Balaam, whichever, the curses that they eventually came through, I look at it, he was at that time talking about a conduit. The conduit just changed.
Okay.
So it's the most important thing was God, not the conduit.
Right. Yeah.
So
That's for sure. For
so
sure.
the conduit just changed because, again, in Tish B'Av, it's like, oh my God, the temple's not here, but we're still here.
Yeah.
I completely look at it completely differently.
Nice. Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all.
Numbers. Not supposed to happen, but maybe it was supposed to happen so that Joshua becomes the leader. Because if you take the entire thing of Numbers out,
Moses wouldn't have screwed up, and yeah.
well, no, not necessarily Moses would have screwed up. I mean, all these other things might not have happened.
Yeah.
He had to have screwed. He had to have had that so that Joshua could become the leader. The people had to see it. They weren't ready for it.
100%.
They weren't ready for it. Now, wasn't Ruth?
That's why, like, the whole Torah, when it was originally written, was one word. There were no spaces. It was all, in other words, the whole thing, the whole Torah was one thought.
Yeah.
And it's all connected.
I just said it reminds me of a soap opera.
Which is why you really can't talk about Torah if you don't know the whole Torah.
Right.
Because you could easily contradict yourself.
Right. Yeah. And wasn't Ruth a Midianite?
Moabite.
A Moabite. That's right. Moabite.
There's a connection between Moab and
Right.
But she was a Moabite.
She was with one with an M. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
I'm chanting today.
Oh.
When I was told to chant, starts with the name of God.
Yeah.
You suggested that wasn't part of
Oh yeah, it is part of saying, but it's not the part that I'm using.
I didn't want to contradict
Yeah, whatever. But I didn't want people to be disappointed that I wasn't going to do the love sometime. So I'll leave it for you.
It's a good story.
It's a very important story. I just thought I learned about Joshua. I said, I'm going to go with it.
Oh, actually.
We've done some love with that. All right. Shabbat shalom.
I like it. My husband's not too sure about this lighter, and I like it lighter.
I think it's healthy because things that were not healthy, you did that a while ago.
Yeah, but no, it's just I feel lighter, so. It upset me yesterday that he didn't say anything, and this is not over the weather.
That's why he didn't say anything.
It's postponed, but it's postponed to a time that it can't be.
We'll get used to it.
We'll see. See, my daughter saw it sort of like I did, and my son, so I think my sister saw it.
She's going to love it.
Next time you're traveling.
Next Shabbos, actually.
check, check, check.
Doing great. Since he's the expert, okay. All I do is I hear all the cough and I hear all the inhalations and stuff.
Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Check.